So in my Dell XPS 17 unboxing video, a bunch of you asked me to compare it to the MacBook Pro 16. So instead of doing a separate video, I thought I'd do a comparison. Now this is not about Windows versus Mac. A lot of you have your own personal preferences, but what this is about is to show you the performance difference and what you're getting with each laptop. Now in terms of design, they're a bit different. The XPS 17 is obviously bigger. It is a 17-inch laptop, which means you have a wider chassis. It's also thicker than the MacBook Pro 16, making it a bit heavier in the bag. The XPS 17 weighs 4.5 pounds compared to 4.3. However, if you do buy the 4K Touch model, the weight on the XPS 17 goes up to 5.5 pounds. The XPS 17 has pretty good build quality, but it does have these sharp edges on the side of the laptop, whereas the MacBook Pro is just more rounded. It feels nicer when you're holding it. Both of these laptops can be opened up with one hand. However, the MacBook Pro has a little lip to get your finger under there a bit easier. The decks of both keyboards are fantastic. The return to the scissor switches just makes it a much more enjoyable typing experience on the MacBook Pro 16. However, personal preference definitely goes to the XPS 17. The switches on these are a bit more tight, making it more enjoyable to type on. Now, when it comes to the touchpad, the MacBook Pro 16 is much bigger, it's more accurate, and it's just better to use. The XPS 17 doesn't have those nasty micro clicks that I got with the XPS 15 where you just run your finger over it and it starts clicking for no reason, but the quality control on this touchpad is still not great. It's a lot looser, making it feel wobbly. If you look really closely, the touchpad is not centered. It's shifted to the right a bit. Sticker placement! We got a nice clean surface on the MacBook Pro, whereas on the Dell XPS 17, we have this tramp stamp. Now I do like the carbon fiber deck. It feels really nice when you're resting your wrists, whereas the metal on the MacBook Pro 16 can feel quite cold. Sound is really good on both of these laptops, but the edge goes to the MacBook Pro 16. Now ports are interesting because both of these laptops have a very similar setup. They both have 4 USB Type-C Thunderbolt 3 ports, but the big difference is that the Dell gets an SD card slot. So if you're a photographer or creator and want that SD card slot, you gotta go with the Dell. Display. The bigger display is on the XPS 17. The XPS 17 also tilts back further. You have about an extra inch when you open up the laptop compared to the MacBook Pro 16. Both of them have 16:10 aspect ratios. Both of them have fantastic color accuracy and gamut, but I do like the fact that you have the option to buy a 1080p matte display with the Dell, which does a much better job with reflections compared to the glossy display on the MacBook Pro 16 or the 4K display on the Dell XPS 17. Now there's one thing to note is that you do have a brighter panel on the XPS 17 and you also have Windows Hello for facial recognition and a fingerprint scanner to log in, whereas the MacBook Pro 16, you only have the fingerprint scanner. Now performance is interesting. You can spec these things to different configurations. I have an i7-10875H processor with a RTX 2060 Max-Q in the Dell compared to a MacBook Pro 16 with a 5600M, which is pretty much equivalent to the RTX 2060 Max-Q inside of here. And they're both very powerful machines. CPU performance is definitely better on the Dell, just the higher clock speeds and the fact that the vapor chamber cooling solution inside of here allows the clock speeds to be higher for longer. So if you're doing Cinebench, just to get an idea of which one's faster, the Dell is. If you're compiling code, the XPS 17 is the fastest laptop I've tested this year. 24 minutes to compile Mozilla Firefox compared to 33 on the MacBook Pro. Now when it comes to GPU-based performance, things are kind of even. If it comes to Photoshop, the MacBook Pro 16 scored higher, making it a better choice for photographers. However, if you're a video producer, you're better off with the Dell XPS 17. It runs faster in DaVinci Resolve, and it also runs faster in Adobe Premiere. Now, if you're a Final Cut user, you're probably not even watching this video because Final Cut only runs on the MacBook Pro. The other upside to the XPS 17 is you could actually game on it. The RTX 2060 Max-Q is powerful enough to play the latest titles, and you also have access to Windows, which means you can download the majority of good AAA titles that exist today. Heat management is definitely not the greatest on both. If anything, it's worse on the XPS 17. Even with the vapor chamber cooler, if you're using the ultra high performance setting, the CPU is staying at 100 degrees. It will never drop down, but it'll continue to push the processor as fast as it can. And because of that, you'll get faster speeds than the MacBook Pro. However, if you switch the profile from ultra performance to optimize, then you'll see a drop in performance and the MacBook Pro will rank higher. Which brings me to fan noise. And both of them get loud. They're not super loud. They're around 40-ish decibels, not nearly gaming laptop category, but if these things underload, you'll definitely hear the fans. And finally, before I wrap this up, 14 hours of battery life on the Dell XPS 17 compared to 9.5 on the MacBook Pro 16. So which one should you buy? It really comes down to your personal preferences. If you live in the Mac ecosystem, it obviously makes more sense to go with the MacBook Pro 16. And the difference in performance between the two models is not massive. It's noticeable, but it's not massive. I think if you want the better quality control and build quality, you go with the MacBook Pro 16. However, if you want the better value to performance, the bigger screen, the expandability, then go with the XPS 17. There's also the price to talk about. You're paying $800 extra for the MacBook Pro with similar specs. So you'd save $800 if you went with the XPS 17. Now I wanna know, which one would you choose in the comment section down below. I hope this video answered a lot of your questions, because if it did, feel free to hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.